Hello everyone. So today I'm going to talk about creating a form, a custom form with Sitecore MVC. I've done videos in the past on web forms for marketers. This is not a web forms for marketers tutorial. This is assuming you've decided that you're going to build a custom form that does not use web forms for marketers. You may question why that might be. There are some weaknesses with using web forms for marketers. The biggest one that I've seen, that I've come across while doing my job, is that web forms markers is not very flexible in terms of styling. So if you wanted a two-part form, if you wanted to have multi-step form, some sort of wizard form, things like that, they're just not as easy to achieve with web forms markers as you might have with some sort of custom form. You might be able to eventually achieve some sort of custom CSS and styling for your form with web forms markers, but it won't be as flexible as a custom form that you develop. The second reason why I'm going to talk about this topic is I've seen a lot of chatter about how to do this with Sitecore on the Stack Exchange website. So I've seen questions about how do you build a form with Sitecore MVC, and that's basically what I'm going to cover today. So I'm going to be using my example project that I've been using for some of my other videos, where I've kind of set up a blog. It's not really all that complete. It's just to show and demonstrate these topics I'll be covering. So I'm going to build just a very simple form with a name, an email, and maybe some sort of description field, and then show how you would build that. So to get started with this, we'll need to configure a new rendering for our page. I'm going to assume this is going to go on our article listing pages or our article text pages, whatever the. So if you had, for example, Acme A, this would actually show up on the Acme A page. It's kind of representing the a comment type system. Let's get started. So like I said, I'm going to create a new rendering for this. This is going to be a controller rendering. You could achieve Sitecore MVC forms with a view rendering, but you're going to need to, in that situation, either do the form post with Ajax. You could achieve that with a view rendering. So you could have a form, and then it could just be an Ajax post back to a specific route that you have defined. The second option is you could post or send data to another source, another page, another rendering, outside of the current page or the rendering that you're actually working with. Now, there's some issues with creating forms with Sitecore. Typically, when you're going to post back to the same page, which you're going to do with your controller rendering, you're going to actually create a scenario where the entire page has to be rebuilt. And that can cause issues. And it's going to be rebuilt using that post verb that you're going to be posting back with. So another scenario, which I'm not sure if I'm going to cover too much in this session on how to fix this scenario, but one of the scenarios you're going to run into is that all the post actions for all the renderings on a given page, if you post back, all those post actions are going to get triggered. So let's say you had a comment feature at the bottom, but you had also another form element at the top. You don't really want that form element at the top to be run and posted back to, because there would be no data for that field or that form. So there's a way around that. You can actually there's actually a Sitecore HTML helper, as well as I've seen solutions online on how to add special input fields, basically just adding hidden inputs and then adding an attribute to the action result that just says, okay, does this match the data that was posted back? No? Okay, well, don't run this code. So, and then it basically only would run in that instance the comments form. So that's pretty much all there is to say on that topic, but let's just go ahead and start creating this stuff. So inside my example, I'm going to create a new rendering, and I'm just going to call this comments for now. It's a controller rendering, like I said. And then once it's created, I'm going to need to define where this lives. So example.web.controllers.articles. Get the articles controller. 1 second, let me just check to make sure it's just singular, not plural. Article controller. And then we're just going to call this comments, just to make it pretty clear what the action is. So that's it defined. So now let's go back into Visual Studio, and we need to start defining some of this. So in my article controller, you'll see some of the other examples and training sessions I've done on kind of Glass and some of the things like that. What I want to do is just create 2 action results. This will be called comments. Probably a better name would be comment form, but you get the gist. This is just telling it that for this next action result I'm going to write, it's only going to accept HTTP post. So basically, when we run this view, when we append it to a page, let's just go ahead and do that real quick. So for now, let's just add it to Acme A. Now, typically, I would not want to do this to one specific page. I'd want to actually add it to the standard values for this. So, not the best example, but this is not common practice. So I'll just call it page.grid. And voila. So when I go to this page, it's going to actually render that. It's basically going to render this action result, not this one, because when I first go to it, everything is a GET request, not a POST. So I would need some sort of form inside my view for the comments that triggers a POST instead of a GET. So I'm going to go to that article. And I'm going to strip out all the things I don't need. And this should, in theory, work. I actually need to publish this. Won't work quite yet. So just go ahead and publish. Now you're going to see that, public action method comments was not found on the controller. So all I need to do is start building this out a little bit further. So first things first, we need to just start defining this comments inside the article. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new view. So here we go. I'll come back to this in a second. The model that we want. We're going to have a div class container. I'm planning on doing a session here soon on front-end development inside Sitecore. This is really just to cover, one, it will help me finally have some sort of visual design for this instance that I'm building. But 2, it will allow, for those that work with only the front-end technologies, you'll get a sense on where you come into this this big picture. So a lot of what I cover is back-end technology, but there's a lot of developers that are just front-end developers working with Sitecore, and you need to know where where you're going to be used. So next, I'm just going to use a using statement to define the form itself. So what this does, this helper, it creates the actual form element and all the attributes that would go inside that form element. So I'm going to do a begin route element, and then I'm going to specify, and then I can specify the form method, which, like I said, I'm going to do a post. So this basically is now a form element, and it's going to spit out a HTML tag that's a form, and then it's going to say that its method is post. We could actually add a few more if we wanted to. We could say, class equals comments form. So if you wanted to do additional styling based off the class of the form, you could do that there. So we're not going to go into that. So the next part I want to kind of cover is I want to start covering creating the inputs themselves. So like I said in the beginning, we're going to do name, description, and email. So I'm going to kind of show a few different HTML helpers. Some of this, what I'm about to show you, is a lot of real just not necessarily Sitecore MVC, but this is more just MVC, .NET MVC. So for any of those that have actually worked with .NET MVC and not Sitecore MVC, some of what I'm about to show you is kind of redundant. So what I need to do really here is define a model for this data. So you could use a view state, you could use a view bag, you could use a few different things to pass data back and forth, but the best way, and a more Sitecore, or not necessarily Sitecore, but the more MVC way, .NET MVC way, is to use some sort of model that I'm going to use between my controller and the view that I created. That's basically what MVC stands for, model view controller. So I need to pass a model, or just it's basically a POCO model that just contains properties that we're going to represent the name, the comment that they're leaving, the comment text, and their email. So we're just going to represent those as properties, and we're going to use that to pass the data back and forth. So let's go into models. All I have now currently in models is nothing. So I'm actually going to just create a new folder called article, and then I'm just going to give this a class, and I'm going to say this is a form comments form view model, just to kind of stick to a naming convention. So you don't have to necessarily call it view model. That's if you just got to be consistent with whatever your naming conventions are. So I'm going to call all my view models view model at the end, but it's up to you. So now we have this. All we have to do is, like I said, create a public string name, email, and public string comment. Now, one other thing that you might need is, what about validation? So we're going to try to cover this a little bit in this tutorial as well, is what about validating that the name is accurate or required? Let's say email. Email is going to be required. So the way you would do this is using data annotations. So basically just saying required. And if you do control period, you'll see that you can use a using component model data annotations. And now it says required, and it's mapped correctly. And then you can also say email. So now it's going to, what this is going to really do is, with the power of Sitecore, or not Sitecore MVC, but .NET MVC, is now it will build the right validations, assuming you're using Microsoft's validations engine, which I'll show how to configure that. So what we want to use is there's a concept of unobtrusive JavaScript, which is basically just means that instead of making things require necessary JavaScript, you use data attributes to kind of say what is required on a given field, etc. So I would have where I've specified required, it would add a data dash required attribute, and then it would specify that this is true. So then using the JavaScript, what it would do is just read those data attributes, not necessarily, it wouldn't have, some actions that are contingent necessary on JavaScript. It would be unobtrusive, basically meaning if for some reason JavaScript is disabled for any reason, your code would still actually work. And with this types of validation, it's also important to note that this doesn't relate to just client-side validation. This is actually going to do server-side validation as well as client-side validation. Even if JavaScript is turned off and you're using unobtrusive, the form will still function, and it may not break in the sense that it won't stop the user from not entering their email address when it's required, but the server-side validation would stop that user from getting past and getting wherever they shouldn't be in the form or in the submit action. So I've defined these attributes. Let's just create one more for the top one here. So I defined that. The next thing I would like to define is when the user submits back to the HTTP post, I want it to be that model. So I'm going to send this model back. And then also I might want to create an instance of that model here. And then return it to the view. And like I was saying that there's two different types of validations, you will want to check that the model state is valid. But you're actually going to want to, ideally, the way I like to code is get rid of the user out of this function as quick as possible. So if the model state is not valid, I will return the view with the model passed back. So now I would do some additional logic here. At the moment, I don't really have any additional logic. So what I will do is I will just redirect the user to the home page if on success. Now this is where you might build a thank you page. One note to make about thank you pages is that you'd probably want to build some sort of rendering parameter or something like that that would allow the users to customize where the thank you page exists. So that's just one thought there. It might be inside the form itself, so you might alter the model and have some sort of, on the model itself, you might have something that says is successful, and you'd pass that back to the view, and then if that Boolean value is set to true, then it would just show some sort of message, but we're just going to redirect the user. Like I said, I'm just trying to keep this pretty simple. So now that that's set, pretty much everything is set to go. I mean, we don't need to, here in this initial call, which would happen on the get, we might want to fill the model with something. So if you have drop-downs, you might want to fill those drop-downs before you send it back to the view, so that instead of having any additional logic in your view, you would have it all here in the controller that you would initialize, and then you'd send it to the view. So let's go back to here, and now we can start building out these inputs. Now with the power of MVC, not just Sitecore MVC, but with regular .NET MVC, we can actually start building out the form pretty quick and easily. So if I use a HTML text box 4, one thing I need to do before that is I just need to update this rendering model to the actual model that I'm going to be using, which is comments form view model. And what I can do is I can just update the using so it knows where to find that. It's articles. So now I can find it. And now I can actually go X and any letter you want. I just like using X's for some reason. Name. Another thing you could do is you can specify a label. And very important, especially when you're using validation, is you actually want a validation message for this. If you don't add this, then you won't know that the form or this specific field did not validate. So obviously there would be more styling here, more classes or div elements or spans, etc. But it's just to demonstrate basically what we have going on. So and what this does is it detects what types of fields these are. So if I was using an email like I'm about to do, it would know that this is an email type of input and only allow and use that with the default instances of your browser or your phone or things like that. So it's actually will spit out an input. It'll say its type is email instead of just text like the first one was, and it will do some other things. And it's helpful for other types of fields as well. Now, like I said, with dropdowns, you would actually have a HTML dropdown list for, so it'd be a little different. But this works with basically any type of string input. And validation message for. Lastly, I will do I want this to be a text area, so with the text, like I said, strings are mostly text box 4, but if I wanted to use a text area, I could just use a text area 4. Now, most of these I would probably want some sort of default text. I'd probably want a class added to them, things like that. I'm just not going to do that here because I'm just trying to demonstrate my point. And lastly, we just need a button to allow for submission. This will just basically trigger the post back action on the form or whatnot. So without this, it would not obviously work. Assuming we're using Bootstrap, we're just going to have a button primary. And we'll just say this is submit. So that's pretty much it. I believe we're ready to go. Let's go ahead and publish this. One thing I will note is that this would be a prime example to use a dictionary. We wouldn't want to just have text here. So we could use the translate text thing here, or at some point I'm going to probably show how to use or create strongly typed dictionary keys in your code base. But it depends on what you have, but otherwise the concept is the same. You don't want text like this in your code base, you want it to be translated so that if you're building this site for the Spanish version of the site, let's say it's a completely different version or whatever the case might be, you don't want just submit here. You'd want to translate submit to whatever the Spanish translation of that is, which I'm not sure what it is off the top of my head. So that is that. I did mention I would show how to configure the validation stuff. There's kind of like two parts to this. So first and foremost, I'm not going to go into this in great length, but or demonstrate it, but in your basic view, you're going to have to make sure you have all the unobtrusive Microsoft validations and things like that. So just to demonstrate that real quick, all you would do is go and you would manage NuGet packages. And you're just going to browse and you're just going to look for, actually, I want validation would be a better way to find it. So I want Jquery. Well, I think this probably depends on it. Let's just confirm that. Yeah, see, so if you install this one, it's going to install Jquery validation, which is this one, and it's going to install Jquery. So this is perfectly fine. I'll just go ahead and download this, make sure it's set to the right project, which it is, and we'll just download it. So now that this code is included, once it is all pulled down, the thing you need to make sure is that it's actually added to the your layout. I recommend using bundles and .NET bundling and minification processes, which I will also demonstrate in the future, hopefully here soon, how to do that, how to set all that up and start using that in your projects to run them efficiently. But beyond this, basically what you could do is you could just include these one by one as well if you don't want to use the bundling setup. Then you would see validation that way, all the jQuery validation, client-side validation. But since I'm not going to really demonstrate that, that's something you have to keep in mind. Also, there is a web config change that you must make, especially for unobtrusive. I will include just a reference to a gist of that in my description below, just of what code you need to add to your web config. So just keep that in mind. I wish you didn't have to add that to a web.config because that's not really the Sitecore way of having patches and things like that. So, but you get the idea. So I'm just going to go ahead and publish this, and then I'm just going to glance back over here. So now when I refresh this error should disappear because now my view exists, my controller actions exist, and everything should be set to go. All right, so you get this thing here. It looks like something's gone wrong. Not sure why we're getting that, but we're definitely getting the form itself is being generated. And then we see our divs here. So you can see that it's created a label for name, and then the input that it created with those HTML helper methods. And then we have everything the same. It's created a text area instead of a text box because we use text area 4. You also see that it's created a button primary. Once I add the bootstrap stylings, it will help with that. Let's just see what I might have done wrong with this wrapper. Oh, we need to, like I said, you need to use a using statement. So now that I'm using the using statement, which is implements iDisposable. So basically, once this is used, it will dispose of itself. Is all that the using statement is signifying, but it also allows me to just mention the wrappers there. So now if I publish again, now it's not giving me all that weird stuff. So I should now be able to theoretically submit it. Since I don't have validation on, it's not going to show me the errors that I would actually see here. Let's let's see if adding that real quick, just so we can make this more of a complete video series. So I'll just add that to the main layout. So basic, and I will just add references to the scripts. So I will just add here, and then I will add a validate. It's the wrong order. I want to include it first. And typically you'd actually want to include these at the bottom of your page, but I just want to get this to work, so that's not what I want to do. I wanted to drag it. So there we go. So they're all referenced. Now in theory, it should all work. So to add that, all we need to do is, like I said, add something to the web.config. So if I go back here and I find that example project, and I go to the website and I find the web config, I'm just going to add something to the app settings real quick. So I would add something just to this app settings. I just need these two entries: client validation enabled and unobtrusive JavaScript enabled. Like I said, not the most efficient because we have to, instead of patching this, we're adding it directly to the web config. So now that that's been saved, we should now be able to test this. So one thing that you'll see right off the bat is all these, now you have all these attributes called data-val. That's a data attribute for the unobtrusive stuff that we enabled just by turning that setting on. So in theory, now we're actually seeing the error messages. You can actually customize these error messages, and also that brings up a kind of important topic, which I plan on doing another session on, is how to customize the validation messages using a more Sitecore friendly way. Since what you'd want to do is set these on the data annotations that you're defining in your model. You don't want to necessarily define these anywhere else because it'd be more streamlined if you define them all in your model versus another approach. So now you can finally see that it's all just working here and we're set to go. So all the validation is working and there's no reason to think that this won't work. So if I click submit, now this is validation right here. So if I type in test, that goes away. It won't let me pass because this is not a valid email. So if I type in this email, it goes away, and now it should let me submit. And on submit, it should send me to the home page of the site, which means it basically made it through all that conditional checks that I had implemented, although I hadn't really implemented all that much. But it's actually that submit is sending the user to this HTTP action, and then it's checking to see if the model state is valid, which it was because we had client-side validation to prevent a user coming in here without it being valid, and then it sends the user to the home page. This is where you would implement additional logic, such as saving the data to a table and a CRM system, some sort of email subscription, sending off emails, things like that. Some of the things that make web forms for marketers very powerful, you would have to customize and build yourself using this method, building a custom form with Sitecore MVC. But there is a lot more flexibility with some of the things that you could build. Web forms for marketers is a little bit rigid in terms of its styling and some of the things that you can achieve. I mean, you can achieve a lot of complex things with web forms for marketers. However, it will require a lot of customization, which I plan on covering in part 2 of my, customizing web forms for marketers video. That should be coming up soon. So that's it for this session. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to me using the email that you saw that I filled in, Dylan Young at Arrow Digital, or you can reach out to me via Twitter or any of my other social channels. Feel free to, just ask questions directly on this on YouTube. Anything, anywhere that you want to ask it, just please ask me, and I will be glad to help you out. So, all right, that's it.